Tonight's presenter is Teejai Travis. And Teejai, it is my pleasure to welcome you from Toronto. And we are hailing the Greater Essex area. So Teejai is a descendant of Afro-Indigenous West Indians who were unsettled in the magic island of Bermuda. He's also descended from a family of foundational Black travelers and conductors of the Underground Railroad. He often identifies himself as astral indigenous, paying homage to his celestial relations that beautifully paint the night sky in shimmering constellation. As an artist and educator, Teejai is passionate about the celebrations and preservation of storytelling. He finds joy and purpose in guiding learning of all ages to discover their story through fun and thought-provoking exercises. Teejai's unique style of exploration can be adapted to accommodate a multi-generational audience of varying abilities. As part of his practice, he incorporates percussion instruments and spoken word poetry to facilitate classroom drumming and storytelling circles. With 11 years of classroom experience, Teejai has invented multiple lesson strategies for bridging his style of creative arts with the standard classroom curriculum. In addition to his classroom work, he has accepted multiple invitations to present workshops for institutions across the country. And Teejai, that is telling me that perhaps Toronto or Mississauga is not too far away. Educators in the Essex County region will recognize Teejai from the multiple video projects he has worked on for the Greater Essex County District School Board. He is the inaugural community for the City of Windsor, the former director of Arts City Incorporated, and the founder of Sacred Story Studio, the home of A Blaze of Story. He's a founding member of the Bloomfield House and the Windsor Youth Center. Teejai has served on the board of directors of various community organizations and has appeared in various award-winning documentaries. His written work and artist highlights can be found in various journals, articles, and anthologies. And his installation work has been shown in various galleries in Canada and the US. So let's join in welcoming Teejai, and we look forward to all that he has to offer. The moderator is Dwayne Taylor. So thank you, Teejai.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for reading through my bio. That's all we have time for tonight. See you later. I'm just kidding. I first want to extend my gratitude for this opportunity to be with everybody today, and I do come here as a representative of my family, my relations, all of my ancestors. And I know that we gather here today with our hearts open and our minds open and our hands open in that purpose for us to build with one another, because any intentions that might bring us into this space together means that we are thinking about the next 7 generations and how we can leave this world, this experience much better than we found it. I'm going to tap this drum, and I'm going to ask if it's coming through the microphone. If it is, if somebody could just give a thumbs up.
No,
It's not coming through?
No, it's
Yeah.
not coming through.
not coming
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, Zoom does this this very smart thing where they can get rid of like background noise, and oftentimes the drum is a background noise, so it doesn't make it through the microphone, which is okay.
There's a setting under mute where you could undo that. Under audio settings, you can have auto, low, medium, or high noise removal.
Right, I'm going to just for the moment, I'm gonna see if I can. Any luck? All right. Thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna start off just by playing the heartbeat of this drum a little bit to connect us. We're coming together far and wide. As mentioned, I'm coming to you from Essex County, but we're all together inside this space. Now, as mentioned, I'm coming to you from Windsor, Essex County. And in Windsor, Essex County, we sit on the traditional lands of the Three Fire Confederacy, which is made up of the Ojibwa, the Adawa, and the Potawatomi. In our particular region, we know that there were many travelers that came through here, so we also acknowledge the Lenape, the Huron, and the Wyandot, the folks who are identified as neutrals as they moved through this particular area. But it's also very important, and it's acknowledged that we think about, you know, those peoples who came into this territory unwillingly, or oftentimes willingly, because Sandwich Town is a space that represented freedom for a lot of folks who were brought into the United States of America and sold and traded into enslavement. This is a bit of where my story starts, and I'm an artist. I write, I share poetry, I share stories. You know, so throughout the presentation, it's going to be a series and a collection of me sharing some of those words with you to pay homage to those stories of my ancestors and so many of the relations that share stories that are so similar to my own. In 1775 into the early 1780s, the Revolutionary War was being fought. There were a lot of enslaved black people who fought with the British. They had the promise of a freedom, of a promised land. Around the same time, maybe 30 years prior to that, there was a baby who was born on a plantation, and that baby would be called Richard Travis Sr. Richard Travis Sr. was born in 1745 on a plantation in Virginia. Richard Travis was born enslaved. And I'm sure he probably went through his childhood and into his adolescence not knowing that there was a world that could exist different from what his experience was. On that plantation, he grew up, he married, he built a family, and not until he was about 50 years old, he and his family were able to self-liberate. So Richard Travis and Lucinda Travis and all of their children, they traveled from the state of Virginia into Pennsylvania. They probably took that journey by foot for the most part, you know, but I'm sure there were opportunities for them to take travel down the river. I've driven from Pennsylvania to Virginia quite a few times, and I know that on the freeway it takes about 5 hours in the car, you know, driving around 100 kilometers per hour, maybe a little bit faster when the traffic is flowing a little bit quicker. But I can only imagine what that journey would have been like for a mother and a father and their children to be making this transition from the south into the north, knowing that at any given moment there was somebody that was going to be hunting them down to bring them back into the south, to sell them back into that institution of slavery. When my ancestors arrived in Pennsylvania, Mercer County, Pennsylvania, some way, somehow, they were able to purchase 320 acres of land for the equivalent of $2 American. The piece of land that they purchased, it was known as Liberia, a freedom town. And word of this freedom town traveled from the north into the south. And as people were preparing themselves to climb aboard that underground railroad and make their way north into freedom, they had known that there was going to be this safe place known as Liberia, this freedom town in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. At this point in my ancestors' story, they are now active conductors on the Underground Railroad. And the parcel of land that they purchased is now divided into smaller parcels, which they are giving to previously enslaved people to begin farming, to build their lives with their families. And they did so for just about a decade or so. They had a thriving community. The white folks living in Mercer County, Pennsylvania, weren't excited to have them in this space at first, but as time moved on, those relationships built. And then there was even a circle of protection that was built around this community. So when they passed the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, word made it to the Freetown, and unfortunately, everybody had to leave. The silver lining of that story is nobody was taken captive, you know, but the Fugitive Slave Act was now giving permission to bounty hunters from the southern states to come into the northern states and collect what they would say are escaped enslaved people. The way that it would often work is if you found yourself in an interaction with one of these bounty hunters and you didn't have one of these pieces of paper that stated that you are a free person of color, you could be taken away and then sold back into slavery. And so many families were destroyed in that way. And if anybody here is familiar with or had the opportunity to see the film called 12 Years a Slave, a lot of that played out throughout that movie. A free man of color was kidnapped and sold back into enslavement, and nobody knew what happened to him for a long period of time. So my family crosses into what we call today Ontario, and they travel throughout the province. They first land in a place that was known as the Queen's Bush, and this was right around the St. Catharines area. Communities of Black folks cleared a piece of land, and once that piece of land was clear, they were kicked out of that land. So they were unable to settle themselves. So they continued to move into southwestern Ontario. And they settled in what was called the Elgin settlement. We know it today as North Buxton. I have family in North Buxton to this day, and every Labor Day we get together. A lot of the descendants of those families, we get together on Labor Day weekend, and we have a 3-day cookout that involves family baseball games. But we're sharing these stories, and something that I was gifted, and something that brings me in, that really carries me into this presentation today, is that in my family, I was gifted the responsibility of being our family storyteller. I started off playing this drum because the drum was handed down to my grandmother, who's called Louise, from her mother, who was called Elsidora. And though my grandmother, who tremendously gave birth to 24 babies, making our family very, very large, none of my aunties and none of my uncles were past the drum. The drum came to me, and with the drum, the responsibility of the stories. And I and that's a piece of my Bermuda connection, which I've been reestablishing over the last couple of years, and I had the opportunity to visit just this past summer during Cup match, and reconnect with the landscape and with the people, and find a place of home there. In this story of art and resistance, it really, in my opinion, it starts with the passing down of stories and having agency, in our timeline. I became very fascinated with my family's story when I was probably a young teenager, and it was due to this book that floats around our community called the Long Road. In the Long Road, it shares the history of Black families in our region, from the late 1800s into about the 1960s. And I'm a person who comes from, very modest background. We grew up quite poor in public housing, and there wasn't a lot of resources. Of course, as children, we didn't know that was our circumstances, but as we got older, the lack of resources were very obvious. And at some point, you can start to link, that lack of resources to structural and institutional racism that is just ingrained in the way that we relate with each other, on this continent that we call North America. But for me, I got to open up a book, and inside that book, there was a page with a picture of my great-great-grandparents. And for me, as a child, to see my family represented in a published book was important, but it also drew a lot of curiosity. Why? Why are we in a book? And I began to read the story of my great-great-great-grandparents and how they arrived in North Buxton, my great-great-great-grandfather, to become the constable of that region, and finding how tremendous that piece of the story is, but then also to learn the story of how he arrived in Buxton, which was taking us back to Richard Travis Sr. and his self-emancipation from enslavement in Virginia, and his journey to Pennsylvania and then into Ontario with his family. 12, maybe 13 years ago, I decided to take a plunge. It felt important to me that I went on a pilgrimage to experience the places that my ancestors traveled during that time in their life. So I got into the car. I traveled into Pennsylvania. I didn't have much of a map, no GPS, nothing like that. I knew which highways that were going to get me from Windsor, Ontario to Virginia. And I knew that trail would bring us through Pennsylvania, through Mercer County, and there was a slight possibility that I would run into that piece of land, and I did. Miraculously, I came upon a historic marker that read Freedom Land, and it was an old cemetery. I get out of the car, I start to read the historic plaque. I put two and two together. This was Liberia. This was the freedom town that was founded by my ancestors, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's surrounded by a gorgeous lake. It's cottage country now, and what's left of our footprint, our family's footprint, is a cemetery. And in the cemetery there are 8 wooden crosses, and burnt into the crosses is ex-slave known only unto God. No names, just a representation of the people who were here and a proclamation of their freedom. I took some pictures, but what I couldn't find was the names of my ancestors. Their names were nowhere to be found. I took that opportunity to go to the town hall. I introduced myself. I went to the library. I introduced myself. I got to hear a few stories about the family, but there wasn't an explanation as to why there was no recognition. They knew who the family was. They learned about the family in their elementary school and their high school, but there was nothing material that represented their name on that story. And that's as far as I got on that first trip. I traveled from Pennsylvania to Virginia. I explored Virginia, I explored Jamestown, and I brought all of these stories back to my family. A few years later, the CBC, they picked up on the story. They were like, we heard about the work that you've been doing in your ancestry, the gift that was given to me through my family to be an artist. I was writing poems about my experience, and there was a reporter at the CBC who's called Stacy, and she said, how would you like to go back to Pennsylvania, go back to Virginia, and we do a whole story on the travel? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And Stacy did what wonderful journalists do. She made all the right calls. She linked me up with all of the right people to have all the right conversations, and that landed me at the Historic Society inside Mercer County, where I met the curator at that time, and his excitement was I was the first Travis to go back to that community since we had left just after 1850. And there had been scholars that have been writing about that story and that piece of land for decades. And he had just a treasure trove of information to give me. That experience and that visit put in my possession a deed to that land, marriage certificate, marriage license, death certificate, but also letters. I got to read letters that were in the handwriting of my oldest known ancestors, and to hold that and to feel that and to bring that back to my family, who were completely disconnected from any of that story. I had become the bridge to that story. Was phenomenal, you know, and it filled in a gap that was there, but it also gave us place, you know. And I would go as far as to say it gave us an ancestral place, because that was the place that our family had chose to be after being someplace they were forced into, you know. So that place is considered to be home. But that in relation to the Underground Railroad, the story that I discovered is one slice of millions of stories. So using my art as a device of resistance, providing a platform for storytelling, documentation, preservation, celebration became very important to me. So I began inviting people that have family stories to share their story so we could document that story, and those stories could be handed down generation after generation. Now, I would like to share a few pieces of poetry with you. One of them that is inspired by the life of Richard Travis, and the other two are acknowledgments of the Black existence in this landscape, and how we exist in this space. Because for a lot of people, way too many people, we tend to feel orphaned in a landscape that we have been living in for 7 generations, 8 generations. My oldest known ancestor was born on this continent in 1745. But his mother, she was born in Mississippi, and who knows where her parents were from. So we have deep roots in this land, but there can sometimes be some internal and external conflict when it comes to, really making this land our home, like really having like roots in this land. So I'm going to first share a piece with you that's titled Acknowledged. This body emerged from earth, flesh cocooned in black oak roots, fingers sprouting from a nowhere garden. I am invisible beneath a sky that looks like me and speaks with my tongue and remembers with my memory. I am orphaned in a territory of fire, where I become a territory unto myself, burdened to carry a hyphen that is addicted to gravity while yearning for stars. Defaulting to blood rituals in search of constellations that are now fractured by the illusion of time, and I am now to believe there is no space for creation stories that are shaped like me. These feet make prints that stain the land and never fade. They bleed from one garden to the next, reaching through the bladed cycles of generational inheritance. Stalking the shadow of belonging, inventing weapons of mass acknowledgement, absorbing ceremony beneath abandoned bridges, reciting songs of reconciliation, practicing forgiveness, and feeling the landscape in the marrow of my bones. If I am the manifestation of divine intervention, it is also true that I inhale the secrets of trees and exhale the dreams of runaway rivers. My imagination technicolors the empty spaces that emerge from the pages of history I have been cut out of. And even from the bottom of a buried wishing well, my presence will be acknowledged by the stars. And I will always be. This piece was inspired by a friend of mine, actually in the Toronto area, and we were having conversations around the documented migration of peoples of color, specifically those peoples who identify as Black, those people who identify as Indigenous, and the solidarity, the creation of community, especially out of resilience, out of resistance, and also that migration story that carried so many Black and Indigenous families and communities down this Underground Railroad as we know it, leaving territories. Specifically to my story, that one that's in Pennsylvania, many of those folks crossed a river and they are in what we call Bucktown, but Lenape Nation. And how through weapons of, I guess we can call them weapons of classifications, that families have been separated, stories have been separated, and marginalized peoples have been siloed. We are hundreds of years, past these moments, and now us, the descendants of those ancestors, are trying to braid these stories back together. In doing that against a doing that against a narrative that really wants to pull us apart, and trying to find out how we exist, in solidarity and together on this landscape. The next piece I'd like to share with you, I titled it "We Are," and it's in connection or relation with the first piece that I shared. My ancestors toiled the trauma of this land into an abundant buffet of fruit. Generations of stories bled into the soil of shifting landscapes. Star children planted beneath tobacco stalks and Confederate flags, musket smoke chokes hope out of picnic trees, and overseers collect brown babies from auction blocks. There is no distinct separation between my body and this land. We know what it means to be bought and sold and free. We are of earth and water, our shape is undefinable. We expand into the abyss of extinction and emerge from the dreams of poets and warlords. Our existence is an acknowledgement of land. The land is an acknowledgement of the depth of our flesh. We speak the language of erupting volcanoes, the width of hidden mounds, whispering rivers rolling into the lap of great lakes, the cathedral ceilings of a wild forest. The hieroglyphic signature of our presence is tagged within the ancient cracks of canyons. Our ancestral blueprint reveals itself in expressions of mountain ranges that stretch the distance of the wandering sky. It reflects our cosmic portrait upon the face of the ocean and sits us in ceremony with Grandfather Moon. We are this place. We are every place our grandmothers touched with their godly hands. If their fingers punctured the ground to plant life, we are the living expression of their intent. She acknowledges us, we acknowledge her, and there is no separation between our bodies and the land we emerge from. We are here. Do you acknowledge that? That's a piece that pays homage to the stories of our aunties and our grandmothers. And how they made a way for this movement of freedom. And in making a way to this movement of freedom, they also instilled in every person that would come from them this budding seed of creative resistance, but also radical collaboration. And I believe it's those seeds that blossomed into beautiful gardens that make space for this to happen right now, for us to be in conversation, for me in the center of my ancestors and their relations to be centered here right now. I believe that every word that is coming from my heart and from my mind is an extension and expression of Lucinda Travis and John and and Richard Travis Sr., you know, who made a way for their family, who broke those chains of conditioned and material enslavement so they could carry their children into what we refer to as freedom so that they could continue the story. And I believe what had them leave Pennsylvania after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed was so that they could make sure the next generation of children would be free so they could pass along that story, so that that story could make it to me, so that I could pass that story to the generations that are coming behind me. So in my practice, in my art practice, that's the majority of my focus. My homage to the ancestors and to all of us who are collectively part of this movement that is like screaming from the rooftops, we can be so much better than we've been. And we are so much better than we are. And where we're going to be years from now, we may not even be able to imagine how amazing that will be. You know, and the evidence of that is us being in a space together, you know, making this space, you know, and being committed, you know, to movements of agency, equity, diversity, not just in the way of diversifying, you know, the people that are around the table, but also diversifying the language that we use. And I'm sure if we are to think back, every person who is inside this space with us right now can probably testify that our use of language and our vocabulary has expanded significantly, and it's due to the fact that we want to see each other and we want to hear each other. We want to create space so that eventually we can make a tapestry of storied poetry that makes, you know, those babies 7 generations down the line so proud of their ancestors. I am so proud of my ancestors and their story. It also makes me feel like I have so much to live up to, but I'm also very confident in knowing whatever spirit was in them to push them forward is inside me. And as material beings, if we are the collection of 700 trillion cells that are collecting information about all of our relations that came before us and the world that surrounds us, then we have all of these stories. And we don't so much have to learn how to do things to push us in the best direction. We just simply need to close our eyes and remember, because it's inside of us already. And that is what we see all the time. You know, when we think about the folks who crossed what we call the what we call the fluid frontier, which is the Detroit River. When we consider, like, you know, the folks that went back and forth across that fluid frontier, when emancipation was proclamated, you know, we have families that are separated by rivers and states and borders, you know, but we are so connected. We're so connected in that way. Being mindful of the time before we move on into some of the questions, I'd like to share a piece of poetry that kind of kickstarted, you know, my journey into rediscovering my family story. He lives in a world that wraps tightly around his wrist, shackles his feet together and ties his tongue to absolute silence. His eyes see the sun rise in the morning and set in the evening. He studied the reflection of the moon, its playful dance upon the river. His nose catches the sweet smell of flowers in the garden, exotic fragrance of imported desserts, the heartful laughter of joy, the painful cries of hopelessness trembling against the wooden walls of a dark, cold box. He's learned to love, found refuge, his escape from bleeding fingers and tired muscles. He lives in a world that wraps tight around his wrist, shackles his feet, and ties his tongue to absolute silence. He is a motherless child of a motherless child. His name was Richard. He was born enslaved upon a plantation in Virginia in 1745. His connection to his mother lost in time. His family roots in Mississippi lost in time. His first memory lost in time. His story swallowed by time, buried in earth, covered in debris. His history out of sight, out of mind, out of time, out of time, out of time, disappear with the moon, return to runaway stars, bite your tongue, hold your breath, don't blink your eyes, remove your feet, extend your wings, close your mind, open your ribcage, activate your heart, and use your wings. His son pulled his decomposing memory from the earth, bathed him in the future, collected his dust in see-through glass jars with no lids, carried him across water beneath starlit skies. Their tongue danced black magic with shadows hiding behind trees, the depth of their forest transformed into digital platforms from anti-human downloads. The water doesn't wave no more. The wind will not swing to the melody of freedom. He is reborn into the illusion of freedom, blood-stained teeth and broken lips. Behind the nightmare of eyelids, he is planted into soiled bottom of a castaway wishing well. He is wished well in death. He is sentenced to life. His life, he is tried to trauma. Of his lost descendants, he was born in an invisible cage, made of sky and earth, ripped from his mother's ship, feet first. He abandoned a blood shadow on a pile of lies inherited by his master, tied together in red and yellow knots of hair, whispered stories of dark age, tales of hunger, disease, death. The walls of the sky drip tears upon clouds that move too slow. Slave hands baptized in old storms, lost in time. His tongue is spread upon the old walls that haunt the heart of American freedom. His song echoes the mind of strange fruit picked by the hands of motherless children, grown in gardens, lost in time. His name was Richard. He might have had a slippery smile that parted rivers and lifted boulders. Maybe he had eyes that could see into the future, wings that carried him from one sun to the next. Maybe he was tired of old poems with loose beginnings, tied tight into a pretty bow, his hands bound together at the wrist, pointing to the heavens in the style of prayer. You put one foot in front of the other. You put one foot in front of the other. You put one foot in front of the other, and don't make no noise and don't get seen. You put one foot in front of the other, and you might get free. Richard Travis arrived in Pennsylvania in 1811. He spent $2 and purchased 320 acres of land his family swallowed into the powerful hallucinogenic glory, drinking freedom from a new glass of northern wind, the sky touching God with gentle hands. Its song is an instrument, a hum and a buzz. The river beat the curve of landscape with scrappy young fingers, but the heat of the south haunted the roots of the trees. The earth trembled at night when the sky turned black. The clouds rained nightmares upon forest. The forest held fugitives in its belly. Freedom is a curse. Freedom is the cure. Freedom is a curse. The flesh ages quick beneath the sky, riddled in a cancer. Babies are born as old tools, dull and rusting. Their handlers work too hard, with too little, for too long. The stars send down prayers from their prison. The line that divides free is not free, washes away with old curses. No one escapes life or death. Everyone is destined to dust, will all be swallowed by time, disappeared into light, until the sun pulls our memories from the earth, resurrects our trauma by sharing our stories. No rest for the weary, peace is fleeting. This is the rhythm of nature, the law of flesh. Richard died a free man at his home in Sandy Lake, Pennsylvania in 1843. His dust remained with the earth. Beneath a sky shining bright of dead stars dancing between the pages of time, he returns to his roots, deconstructing flesh and bone into earth, grounded beneath the fugitive slave town he built with his hands. Chewed up and swallowed by the compassionate mouth of sky, he went on to his Lord, and now he is free. He went on to his Lord, and now he is free. He went on to his Lord, and now he is free. These works are inspired by what I imagine the reality may have been for these families. When I first started to really dig into these stories and place them beside all that we'd been taught about the Underground Railroad and that walk or that jog or that run, that sprint, that swim into the idea of freedom, what freedom means, what freedom could be for a people, for adults, for children who had never experienced it, had no measurement for what that means. You know, thinking about those powerful stories of Harriet Tubman, those powerful stories, and then knowing that you and that your family exist in the tapestry of those stories and are contributors to those stories is amazing. And I truly believe that this art of resistance that lives inside storytelling is the generational wealth that we inherited from our relations, from our ancestors. It's not lost on me what was also lost to them, you know, through structured racism, institutions of oppression. It's not lost on me that my family fled from Pennsylvania so that they could be free in Canada. But what about those 320 acres of land? And what about the way that 320 acres of land would appreciate over the course of 220 years? You know, and what that meant for me and for my cousins and for my aunties and my uncles to have what we identify as freedom, but exist in that freedom under the oppression of poverty. This is why, in my opinion, the art of resistance is so important. because the wealth that exists inside those stories is worth 1,000 acres of land, 10,000 acres of land. Our ability to connect, to create, and to preserve community is everything. And when we consider that travel through those Southern American states into the north, eventually into Canada, we have to consider the wealth of our ancestral inheritance. And in my experience, the wealth of that ancestral inheritance has provided me the opportunity to see the world through storytelling, and to let other people know, especially those people of my experience, that you too have this key to the world through your story. This powerful jewel that was born into you, that is you, that is your worth, that gives reason to take up space, that gives reason to lift your voice, that gives reason to celebrate, but also gives reason to resist. The name of that last piece that I shared, it's actually it's the beginning of a one-person play that I'd written to share the story of my family. The show is Born Enslaved, a freedom story, and the title of that piece is The Story of Richard. Yeah, and that concludes everything that I brought with me today. So if there are any questions, we can slide into that now, or if anybody has any comments or anything to say, I'm here.
First of all, I would just want to thank you so much for sharing your stories and sharing your poems. I just, as a Black person myself, I found that they resonated. So much of what you said resonated with my experience, and I truly believe that so much of what you said resonates to even people who don't share our experience as well. I think it really helped people understand it, and for that, I thank you. So I just would like to start by asking Reverend Allison Kemper if anyone has any questions, if any of the QAs, or anyone has come with any questions in the chat.
The first question and the second, Dwayne, TJ's already answered Aldrine's first question, which was the title of the last piece. But she also asked another really wonderful question. Do you feel an obligation to the narrative, TJ? Do you feel an obligation of freedom?
I absolutely do feel an obligation to the narrative. It's my belief that narrative, it's in my bones, and it's in my body, and not putting it out into the world, just let me put it like this. I guess the truth that I was given the interest or the curiosity to discover the story means that I have a purpose to obligate myself around the narrative, to carry that in my bones and in my body, so that it can continue to live on, not in the fashion of the trauma that could so easily pour out of such a narrative, but of the resilience and the triumph. I'm the other end of Lucinda and Richard's story, and I'm in a position to move free around this world and to bring them with me everywhere. it's of my belief that we are our ancestors. Like we are made up of what they were made up of. And if we consider notions of generational memory in the way that we consider like generational traumas, then then they're sharing those stories through me, and I get to be a vessel for that. And I do very much feel an obligation to be used in that way. And in the same for the freedom piece. The freedom piece is a bit tricky, because people are experiencing freedom in multiple ways, and the idea of freedom can also be quite triggering to a lot of people who still feel bound in the oppression of the world that we're living in, and the narrative that there's so much climbing for us to do. We're coming together as an example, as a testament of what can happen when we work together and we share spaces. But I'm not so foolish to believe that the access that I have is also afforded to many other people. So I do, like, my obligation around that freedom is to make sure that any platform that I have the opportunity to touch can also be extended to other voices, and just like using myself as a vessel for those stories, using any opportunity that I might have as a vessel to extend to others.
All right, we have another question, and it is, what is the Greater Essex County School Board doing with your stories and others like it?
Yeah, so I have a very dear cousin who's called Chantel Browning Morgan, and she was one of the folks that helped to create the Black curriculum in Windsor, Essex County. And unfortunately, there were some years where it wasn't it wasn't mandatory to teach that piece of the curriculum, so it ended up on a lot of shelves for a long time. And in the last few years, the volume that was created was updated, and we started to see it in a lot more spaces. And if we reflect back to 2020, when a lot of people started to get like very serious about about putting our bodies against anti-Black racism and creating those spaces for this to happen. Also, what was going on was the schools were taking note. So in Windsor, we had there was a Black Lives Matter march probably every day, and this is like right around the same time as COVID was starting to happen. So the Greater Essex School Board, they became very serious about getting this information to their students, and that also meant they found a value in a story like mine, and that opened up classroom doors for me to go in, share my story, do workshops, receive invitations to create video work that's used for the teacher's professional development, and opened up opportunities for consultation as well. So when we consider the length of time that we've not been doing this work, we are just at the beginning of what's happening. But I would say that the wheels are really starting to turn. And like just this month, it's Black History Month, and almost every day this month I've been in a different classroom with a different grade, talking about these stories, but also encouraging people to be excited, about their stories.
Right, so we have only a few more moments before we have to say goodbye, but I'm going to abuse my power as the moderator right now, and I'm going to take the last question because I've had a burning question for you since I heard one of your stories. So what you said about roots and the way you speak about the land in your poems and your stories, it really resonates with me. Because Black people in the Americas, we're not exactly natives in the sense that the indigenous people are, but at the same time, so much of our history begins here. So I've never really been able to reconcile that, and I was just wondering, sort of, if you could just tell me more, I guess, about what your thoughts are about how we sort of see ourselves, how we see ourselves in relation to this land of North America and this land of the Caribbean or South America, or how we see it as opposed to how we see ourselves, with Africa.
Yeah, my my approach to that, and it's something that I had to roll into over time, is that for my particular experience and many other folks, we we do have indigenous roots to this Turtle Island, just through just through the integration of peoples, but we've also grown up as either Black people or indigenous people, and due to so much of the isolation and so much of the oppression, we've also ended up very protective of those two things. Exploring the way that they kind of meet in the middle is something that we're just starting to create language around, so for myself, I was exposed to ceremony and tradition for a very long time, but I remember going into ceremony as an adult, and sometimes not feeling like welcomed in spaces. And that's the piece, and that's why it's really important that we get to know who we are and where we come from, so that when we step into a space, we can introduce ourselves in a good way, in a meaningful way. For me, my ancestry goes back so far on this continent that, there's a line in one of these poems where it says, if the grandmothers put their hands into the ground to plant seeds, those seeds are me and my relations. We're like, we can't be of other spaces. We only know this space, and so we have to do the work to understand what that means. It could be very easy to exist inside a nation and then start to appropriate like traditions and relation, and try and, you know pull the card of the Black experience. But what's most important is, you know doing the work, like being part of that reconciliation work, you know being confident in who you are and why you're stepping into a space, and also being very, very confident in listening and not saying too much, and then getting into that old habit of, like, speak when you're spoken to. There's certain places where that is very important, and when we find ourselves in a space where we're not quite sure how to reconcile our place and our relationship with this land, then we need to go to the folks who we have confidence in being stewards of the land and ask them, like, how do I find my place here? And the chances that you would be denied that teaching or that lesson is very, very slim, and if you are denied that opportunity, it might not be you, it might just be that person, and there's always somebody else that you can talk to. But, like, doing the work is so important. you know, because we are in many ways discouraged from like connecting to this land in a meaningful way. And like we are like we're here. Like this landscape is it's in our bones. It's in our breath. Like it's all that we know. We're born into this, you know, so it's well worth our while to just to do the work, to earn the invitation, and then to you know, be part of community.
Thank you so much for that. So thank you again for answering our questions and sharing your stories and sharing your poems. It was truly an honor to be part of this. So now I would like to invite Reverend Leonard Leader to extend a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. Am I coming through okay, everyone? I
Yes, you
was
are.
certainly glued to not only the screen, but listening intently. And TJ, on behalf of the group gathered here this evening, want to thank you as an educator and artist. And what touched me when you got started was your skill as a percussionist, and I've endeavored for many years to acquire that skill. So you might have a student rapping at your door. Your service to the community, I'm grateful for that. And as you spoke with us, I was really impressed by your giftedness and your responsibility in being the person in your family to do the research. I related to that very well, as I've been trying my very best to discover my own story. And so your family history that you reminded us that goes back to 1745. But I also wanted to thank you for the reminder to us that paying homage to our ancestors create in us the pride, the confidence, and the motivation, and reinforces our own obligation. And so on behalf of the group, TJ, I want to thank you very, very much for your presentation. And you've encouraged us. And I'm certainly excited, on a very personal note, to take action and to become one of the stewards of my own family story as we continue to build community. On behalf of the group, thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. I'm blessed to be here right now. I only wish I didn't get a chance to tell the Bermuda story. So maybe we can get together some other time and we can talk about Bermuda.
For sure. Looking forward to that.
So I believe I will now talk about our next session and invite everyone to register for that as well. So the next session is on March 21st and is a kind of part 2 of tonight's discussion. Again, focus on the Underground Railroad, this time with special guest Roger Gibbs. Roger Gibbs is a Barbadian-born singer, guitarist, and recording artist who composes, arranges, and performs Caribbean acoustic music. So very much looking forward to that. And you can register over on the Diocesan webpage where you registered for tonight as well. And I hope to see you all there. And I will call on the Reverend Deacon Allison Kemper for our closing prayer.
Let us pray. Thank you, God, for bringing TJ amongst us. And thank you for guiding his family and their rich, deep stories into our lives. We pray for TJ and for his drum, and for the continuing custody and encouragement of storytelling, for the heritage of the Travis family and all who have much to tell. And we thank you for bringing us together to hear and to begin a celebration of this story. We ask you to send us forth to learn more stories and to speak our own stories with truth and humility. In Christ's name we ask.
Amen. Amen.